FLM, wide open thinking, world-class work, and far-reaching results. Now with locations in Minneapolis, Columbus, Indianapolis, and Washington, D.C. A strategic marketing and communications company dedicated to serving clients who specialize in the business of agriculture and the life of rural communities.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week interview. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Senior Editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. And the big news that came out of Washington this week didn't come until early Thursday morning. We'd seen leaks and snippets and some bits and pieces of this news, but it finally became official early Thursday morning when the White House released their first budget outline of the Trump administration. You may have seen some of the numbers so far, either in an Agri-Pulse write-up that Phil did or in some other places, some big cuts to food and ag programs, particularly in USDA. The big headline was a 21% cut. EPA felt the burden more than any other government agency with a 31% cut. But Phil, looking at the budget outline and some of the numbers that were released, there's a little bit more to it than just that 21 and 31 figure.
Right. Well, first of all, we have to, this is a policy statement. This is a set of priorities that the Trump administration of the White House is laying out as Congress starts its writing its budget to finish the current fiscal year that ends in October, and for fiscal 18 that starts October 1st. Very importantly, this is only a summary of a portion of the federal budget. This is what we call discretionary spending. It's actually a relatively small part of overall government spending. In the parlance here on Capitol Hill, discretionary programs are those that where the spending levels are not set or mandated by laws, like the Farm Bill. And actually, less than 20% of the money that goes through USDA is actually considered discretionary. The rest of it is all the Farm Bill programs, the crop insurance, conservation, most of the conservation programs, the food stamp, supplemental nutrition assistance program, school meals are all considered mandatory spending. So this was focused just on, it's about 18% of USDA's budget in any given year, and that's where they proposed cuts at this time to pay for a big increase in defense spending and increased spending in Homeland Security, in part to start building the border wall.
So rest assured, America's farmers and ranchers, the USDA did not lose 21% of its money today, but we did see, and a lot of the times this budget can serve as kind of a signal of administrative priorities as negotiations begin with the Congress for what will eventually become FY18 spending, which they have to finalize, one would think, by end of the current fiscal year in the end of September. So we do have a little bit of an idea of the playbook that the Trump administration is going to be operating under.
Right. I think the big message coming out of this is, in this budget, is that domestic programs and defense and the border are the top priority of this president.
Right.
One of the big areas that gets cut in this bill, as far as agriculture department is and farm programs and are concerned, is food aid. International food aid. They actually proposed to eliminate the McGovern-Dole International School Feeding Program that was named for former Senators George McGovern and Bob Dole. It's proposed to be eliminated. We also believe that there is a big cut to the Food for Peace program. No one is quite sure how big that cut is because it's not specified, and it was moved from USDA actually over into the State Department budget. So just as an aside, USDA's cut would actually be larger than 21% if they included that Food for Peace reduction in there. The other things they cut were they want to reduce staff at the USDA field offices, particularly those that deal with rural development and NRCS. They also propose to cut some rural development spending, water and wastewater loans and grants, and also there are cuts to research. Again, we don't know exactly what the size and where those will be as well. But these are going to be vulnerable areas as as Congress starts to write the budget, because probably part of the thinking of the White House when they go after these particular programs is they don't have what we call mandatory spending. They're not mandated by the Farm Bill and in terms at a certain level. So it makes them a little more vulnerable politically to some of the other programs in the budget.
Right, and we know that one of the things that you turn to Agri-Pulse for is for the specifics and the minutia, and really to grind down into the details. And we appreciate your patronage for that, and we would like to provide you with specifics on this budget. We genuinely would. But Phil, we were talking before we hit record here today that it's not that we're out of spite not providing you with that information. It is genuinely not known by the media and by a lot of folks on Capitol Hill how these cuts are actually going to work as you go program by program at all these different government agencies.
Yeah, you have committee chairmen like the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Ed Royce, was putting out a statement saying he didn't know exactly where a lot of these reductions were going to be made. That's not unusual, but for the top line budget summary to come out of the White House, but usually what's very different this year is usually have very specific, detailed proposals to come out of the departments as well, and that's not there. The other thing that's different this year is we don't have an agriculture secretary yet, and so there was not a agricultural secretary in place at USDA to make a case to the White House for or against some programs and others. So the calculus there, political calculus there, could change once, assuming Sonny Perdue is confirmed as Ag Secretary and gets to his office there on the Mall.
And some important dates to continue to watch here. There's supposed to be some more details to come from the White House on this budget proposal at some point in May, and also kind of a separate issue, but similar. Do keep in mind that government funding does expire at the end of April. And so Congress does need to act in some regard to get some kind of a funding mechanism going forward for a continuing resolution, an omnibus, whatever, to get government funding to continue once April is done.
Good point on those mandatory programs. You said they're going to have another proposal in May. We expect this spring. That's when they will actually propose cuts to all those mandatory programs, which, as we told you, is more than 80% of USDA's budget. So stay tuned, there's more to come.
Mm-hmm. And on another note, the trade policy for the new administration continues to be a hot topic, especially with agricultural groups that are interested to see how their exports will be impacted by potential trade issues with other countries. We did see a bit of some more information become revealed on that front as the new trade representative had his confirmation hearing this week, Robert Lighthizer. Phil, we're able to get some kind of an indication, and agriculture did come up at this hearing, which is not always the case for other cabinet secretaries.
Came up. This is no surprise with the Finance Committee. There are a lot of farm state members on there, including Pat Roberts, the chairman of Ag Committee, Debbie Stabenow, the ranking Democrat, and a number of others, Chuck Grassley, John Thayer. I'm going to leave a lot of people out. there was question after question after question, or in some cases, not so much questions as senators trying to drive home the importance of ag and the concerns that are out there in the country about particularly potential retaliation from Mexico or China to the aggressive trade enforcement that the president wants to do, as well as in renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement. So those points were made over and over. Bob Lighthizer made clear that he understood them. He made a couple of points that I thought were interesting. He acknowledged that ag was a big loser from our withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He also said that while he understood that ag had a lot to lose in terms of trade with Mexico, he thought it was possible to protect that trade while at the same time improving our trade balance in the manufacturing sector.
So we're not going to go in too much more detail on that confirmation hearing. We do have a story in it in our Agri-Pulse newsletter. If you haven't had a chance to check that out, I'd encourage you to do so. Agri-Pulse senior trade editor Bill Thompson was at that hearing and was able to give a good synopsis of those events. And just want to briefly mention on another note, something that Phil had an Agri-Pulse Daybreak today, and I did an audio piece on it as well. There's a number of ag leaders that went to the White House to talk with the National Economic Council on Wednesday, had a discussion there that they described generally as very positive. They were able to get some assurances on where agriculture stands in the administration's trade priorities. Some good discussion was had there, according to some of the folks that were in the room that spoke to us. And so that was, for a number of them, that was their first meeting with staffers from the new White House, and they seemed to leave there with a general decent idea of where things stood.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of points that have been clear both from the hearing and that meeting yesterday. One is that trade policy is going to be more of a team effort. We're used to administrations where the U.S. Trade Representative's office has taken the lead, has been the focus of trade negotiations, trade enforcement. It's different. That's becoming quite clear. I think this was reiterated at the hearing and in the meeting at the White House, that this is really going to be a team. It's not going to just be USTR, but it's going to be like Peter Navarro, the chairman of the National Trade Council at the White House, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, and others. Another thing that was that we're told was said at the meeting is that the administration would not tolerate retaliation against ag exports as they carry forward with these negotiations. So I'm sure ag groups will be holding them to that.
Welcome news, I suppose, to hear, and it'd be good things for, and as Phil mentioned, ag groups definitely going to want to hold them to that commitment. But a lot of things that happened this week, and a lot of things that mean we're going to have other things to keep an eye on as events unfold here in Washington. And that's exactly what we're here for here at Agri-Pulse Communications, and we look forward to continuing to cover the news and events, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. I think that's going to do it for this week. So for Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.